You can have perfect technique and still fail when it matters most. That sounds wrong, doesn't it? Because everything you've been told says the opposite. Learn more, improve your skills, optimize your strategy, and eventually, you'll win. But here's the truth no one tells you. If you're watching this, chances are you've already tried that path. You've worked on yourself. You've learned, practiced, refined, and yet, somewhere along the way, you slow down. You lose momentum. You burn out. Not because you don't know what to do, but because you can't sustain it. So, let me ask you something. Is your problem really a lack of skill? Or is it that you can't hold your ground long enough for your skill to matter? Because the truth is, your greatest enemy is not complexity. It's collapse. Centuries ago, in feudal Japan, warriors faced a brutal reality. It didn't matter how perfect your technique was in the first minutes of battle. What mattered was who was still standing hours later, and most of them weren't. Not because they lacked training, not because they lacked intelligence, but because their bodies gave up, before their minds did. There was a principle they understood, one that modern life has completely forgotten. That skill without endurance is just potential waiting to fail. In this video, you're going to discover the hidden discipline that separated the warriors who survived from those who died with perfect form. And more importantly, you'll start to see why in your own life you might be losing battles you should be winning. But before we go deeper, I want to ask you something simple. If you've ever felt like you start strong, but can't finish, comment yes below. Because what you're about to hear might completely change how you train, how you work, and how you see yourself. And to understand it, we need to go back to a young warrior who did everything right and still lost everything. Chapter 1. The Collapse. Hida Province. Spring, 1598. Kaito had executed the same strike 1,000 times. Each movement was precise, his stance perfectly balanced, his breathing controlled. His blade moved exactly as it was taught, clean, efficient, flawless. In the quiet courtyard of the dojo, he looked like the future of the samurai, and everyone believed it. "You are ready," his master said one afternoon, watching from the shadows. "Your technique is beyond your years." At 23, Kaito had trained for nearly a decade. He studied not only the sword, but the philosophy behind it. He could recite the principles of strategy, explain the logic of timing, even teach younger students with clarity and confidence. But there was something no one talked about. After 30 minutes of practice, his hands would begin to ache. After an hour, his shoulders burned with a dull, creeping pain. After 2 hours, he needed to stop. Not because he lacked discipline, but because his body simply couldn't continue, and in the dojo, that didn't seem to matter. Training sessions were controlled, structured, short. They focused on form, not endurance, precision, not pressure. The belief was simple: if your technique was perfect, everything else would follow. Physical conditioning, that was considered crude, almost beneath a warrior's dignity. A true samurai wins with skill, not strength, his master often said. Kaito believed it. Until the day everything changed. A messenger arrived just before sunset. Breathless, urgent. War had begun. Every able samurai was ordered to prepare. The atmosphere in the dojo shifted instantly. What had once been a place of calm discipline became heavy with tension. Armor was checked. Blades were sharpened. Conversations grew quieter. This was no longer practice. This was real. That night, Kaito sat alone, staring at his hands. They looked steady, capable, trained. But for the first time, a question entered his mind. Not about his skill, but about his limits. He had never fought longer than 10 minutes at full intensity. He had never felt what happened after exhaustion set in. He had never tested whether his body could obey his mind. When everything started to break, 3 weeks later, he stood among hundreds of warriors, waiting for the signal to charge. His technique was perfect. His mind was sharp. But beneath the armor, there was a weakness no one had prepared him for. And in a battle where survival depended not on how well you began, but on how long you could endure, that weakness would decide everything. Chapter 2. The Principle. The night before the battle, Kaito couldn't sleep. The camp was alive with quiet tension, armor shifting, low voices, the distant crackle of fire. But beneath it all, there was something heavier, something unspoken. The awareness that by this time tomorrow, many of them would be gone, restless, Kaito walked beyond the rows of tents, searching for silence. Instead, he found something else. In a small clearing, 5 warriors were training. Not practicing forms, not rehearsing techniques, training. One of them swung a massive iron club, slow, controlled, each repetition deliberate, his shoulders moving like stone. Another gripped a thick rope, twisting it with such force that his forearms looked like they might tear through his skin. A third stood before a wooden post, striking it again and again, each impact echoing through the night like a drum. There was nothing elegant about it, no beauty, no philosophy, only effort, only endurance. Kaito watched, confused. This wasn't anything he had learned. "You've never seen this before, have you?" The voice came from behind him. Kaito turned to see an older warrior, scarred, calm, his presence heavy in a way that didn't need to be proven. "No," Kaito admitted. "We don't train like this in my dojo." The man gave a short, humorless laugh. "Then your dojo has never seen real battle." His name was Ryuzen, a veteran of more campaigns than Kaito could imagine. Ryuzen stepped closer, studying him. "Tell me, how long can you fight at full strength?" Kaito hesitated. "Our training sessions last about an hour. Sometimes 2. Ryuzen nodded slowly. "And how long do you think tomorrow will last?" Kaito didn't answer, because he didn't know. "In the first hour," Ryuzen continued, "everyone looks skilled. Clean technique, sharp movement, controlled breathing." He gestured toward the men training. "But in the second hour, things change. Technique begins to break. In the third, that's when people start dying. Not from lack of skill, from exhaustion. Hands stop gripping, arms stop lifting, legs stop responding." Ryuzen picked up a heavy stone tool from the ground and handed it to Kaito. "Chi. Isi. Grip strength." Kaito took it, the weight surprising him. 30 twists, Ryuzen said. Kaito began. By the 10th, his forearms burned. By 20, his grip weakened. At 27, it slipped from his hands. Silence. Kaito stared down, breath unsteady. He couldn't even hold a weight for 30 seconds. And tomorrow, he was expected to hold a sword for hours. "Now you understand," Ryuzen said quietly. "Perfect technique executed by a weak body is just a slower way to die." Kaito looked back at the warriors training. For the first time, something shifted inside him. Not doubt in his skill, but doubt in everything he thought was enough. "How long does it take to build this?" he asked. Ryuzen didn't hesitate. "Months. Years, if you want it to matter." Kaito tightened his fists. "I don't have that." "No," Ryuzen replied. "You have tonight." A pause. Then, more softly, "Train with us. It won't make you strong by morning, but it might teach you what real strength feels like, before you need it." Kaito looked down at his hands again. Then, slowly, he reached for the stone. "Teach me." Chapter 3. The Test. Dawn broke over the valley like a blade cutting through silence. Kaito stood in formation, surrounded by hundreds of warriors. The air was cold, but his body wasn't. His arms still ached from the night before. Just 2 hours of unfamiliar training had awakened muscles he didn't know he had, and already they were exhausted. His grip tightened around the sword. This is what real strength feels like. The horn sounded, and everything exploded. Hour 1. The first clash was chaos, steel against steel, bodies colliding, voices shouting, then disappearing just as quickly. Kaito moved on instinct. His training carried him. One enemy approached his stance sloppy, his guard open. Kaito stepped in. One clean strike. Victory. Another opponent. Another exchange. His technique was flawless, efficient, controlled, just like in the dojo. For a moment, it worked. Adrenaline surged. Confidence followed. "Maybe I am ready." Hour 2. The rhythm changed. The fights lasted longer. Opponents didn't fall as quickly. Movements became heavier, breathing deeper, harder. Kaito felt it first in his hands. A dull ache, growing with every strike. Then his forearms, burning. He adjusted his grip, tightened, tried to ignore it. Another opponent charged. Kaito countered, but slower this time. His arms trembled on impact. He won, but it took longer, and it cost more. Hour 3. Everything hurt. His shoulders felt like they were tearing from the inside. Each time he raised his sword, it felt heavier than before. His breath came uneven, his legs slower to respond. An enemy engaged him. Not refined, not skilled, but persiste. The fight dragged on. 5 minutes, 6. Kaito's strikes lost precision. His blocks came late. His timing off by just enough to matter. He won. Barely. As the opponent fell, Kaito's hands shook violently. For a moment, he almost dropped his sword. And then, Hour 4. This is where everything collapsed. His vision narrowed. Sounds blurred. His body felt distant, like it no longer belonged to him. Another enemy appeared. Not a samurai. A foot soldier. Rough. Untrained. Inelegant. In the dojo, Kaito would have ended this in seconds. But this wasn't the dojo. The soldier attacked. Kaito tried to block. Too slow. The blade slipped through, cutting his shoulder. Pain exploded. He tried to counter. His arms didn't respond. They felt empty, heavy, useless. The soldier moved again. Kaito raised his sword, his signature strike, perfected over years. But now, it was slow, weak, predictable. The soldier stepped aside, countered. Kaito's body didn't move. His mind screamed, move, move. But nothing happened. The blade struck, once, then again. Kaito fell. The sky above him blurred into white, and as everything faded, one truth became undeniable. It wasn't his technique that failed him, it was his body. And in a world where survival belonged to those who could endure, perfection meant nothing if you couldn't last. Chapter 4. The Truth Beneath the Blade. 3 days later, the news returned to the dojo. Kaito was dead. Not in a glorious duel, not surrounded by fallen enemies, but in the 4th hour, defeated by someone less skilled, because his body failed before his will did. That night, his master sat alone. For decades he had taught the same belief. Perfect your technique, sharpen your mind, and victory will follow. But now, that belief stood in front of him, broken. And for the first time, he questioned everything. Because what happened to Kaito was not an accident. It was inevitable. What warriors like Ryuzen understood, and what modern science would later confirm, is this. Fatigue is not just discomfort. It is the point where your body stops obeying your mind. At the beginning of a fight, your muscles are fueled. Your nervous system fires clean signals. Your movements are sharp, precise, controlled. Technique works because your body can execute it. But as time passes, something begins to change. Energy depletes. The body runs on stored fuel, ATP. And once that begins to drain, your muscles can no longer contract with the same force. Your grip weakens. Your speed drops. Your coordination starts to break apart. This is where most people lose. Not because they don't know what to do, but because they can no longer do it. And it goes deeper than muscle. Your nervous system, the system that controls every movement, also begins to fail under prolonged stress. Signals slow down. Reaction time increases. Precision disappears. What once felt effortless becomes impossible. Kaito's technique didn't vanish. His body simply couldn't carry it anymore. This is why conditioning was never optional. Grip strength alone determines how long you can stay in the fight. The moment your hands begin to fail, everything else follows. You can't hold your weapon. You can't defend. You can't attack. You're done. The old methods understood this. Chiishi training built relentless grip endurance. Makiwara hardened the bones, so impact didn't break you. Tetsubo forged shoulders that didn't quit after hundreds of strikes. These weren't rituals. They were survival systems. And yet, most ignored them, because they weren't elegant, they weren't impressive, they didn't look like mastery, but they were the difference between lasting and collapsing. The truth is simple. Technique wins in the beginning. Conditioning decides everything after. And this doesn't just apply to battle. In your life, the same pattern repeats. You start strong, motivated, focused, disciplined, but when things get hard, when time stretches, when pressure builds, you don't fail because you don't know what to do. You fail because you can't sustain it. Kaito's story isn't about a battlefield. It's about a mistake most people are still making. They train for the first hour, but life is always decided in the 4th. Chapter 5. The First Transformation. 1 month after Kaito's death, the dojo felt different. Quieter, not the calm silence of discipline, but the heavy silence of something unresolved. Every student knew what had happened. They all remembered his skill, his precision, his confidence, and they all knew how it ended. That morning, their master gathered them in the courtyard. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes moved from one student to another, as if weighing something deeper than words. Then he spoke. I was wrong. The words landed harder than any command. For 30 years, I taught that technique was everything, that the mind, properly trained, would overcome all obstacles. He paused. Kaito died because of that belief. No one moved. I sent him into battle with a perfect form and an unprepared body. The master's voice didn't rise, but it carried weight none of them had ever heard before. From today, everything changes. That afternoon, the courtyard transformed. Gone were the quiet repetitions of forms. In their place, stones, thick ropes, wooden posts, heavy staffs, and beside them stood Ryuzen. This is where you begin, he said. The first exercise was simple. Grip the stone. Twist. 30 times. The first 10 were manageable. By 20, their forearms burned. At 25, hands began to fail. Most didn't reach 30, not because they lacked discipline, but because their bodies couldn't continue. Good, Ryuzen said. Now you see the truth. The training continued, striking the wooden post until knuckles throbbed, swinging the heavy staff until shoulders trembled, carrying stones until legs refused to move. There was nothing elegant about it. No clean lines, no perfect forms, only effort, only resistance, only the raw confrontation between will and limitation. After the first week, one student, Daiki, approached the master. My technique is getting worse, he said. I'm too tired to execute properly. The master looked at him without hesitation. Your technique hasn't gotten worse. A pause. Your body was always this weak. The words cut deeper than any blade. You're just feeling it now. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Something began to change. Hands hardened, grip strengthened. Movements became heavier but more stable. The sword no longer felt like something they had to control. It felt like something they could carry, for as long as needed. By the third month, the difference was undeniable. They weren't just more skilled. They were more durable, more grounded, more dangerous. Because now, their technique had something behind it. Daiki stepped into a sparring match against a visiting warrior, older, more experienced, technically superior. At first, the difference was clear. The visitor moved cleaner, faster, sharper. But the fight continued. 10 minutes, 15, 20. And then something shifted. The visitor's arms slowed. His breathing broke. His strikes lost power. Daiki was tired too, but he was still standing, still moving, still capable. And in that moment, the outcome was decided, not by who had better technique, but by who could keep going. After the match, the visitor lowered his sword. What changed? He asked. The master answered quietly. We stopped training to look skilled and started training to survive. That was the beginning, not of perfection, but of transformation. Chapter 6. The Forge. 6 months passed. By then, the training had stopped feeling like punishment and started revealing something deeper. The students no longer resisted it. They understood it. Their bodies had changed harder, denser, more capable. But more importantly, their relationship with effort had shifted. Pain was no longer a signal to stop. It was simply part of the process. This is where real training begins, Ryuzen said one morning. Before, you were building strength. Now, you learn how to endure. The training evolved. No longer just repetition, but structure. Four pillars. 4 ways to forge a body that would not fail. First, grip endurance. Every morning began with the key ishi, 50 twists in each direction, then rope holds until the fingers gave out. Then again, the goal was simple. Your grip must not fail before your will does. Second, bone conditioning. The makiwara stood silent in the corner. Strike. Again. Again. Hundreds of times. At first, pain, then swelling, then adaptation. The hands changed. Not just stronger, but unbreakable. Impact no longer shocked the body. It transferred through it. Third, muscular endurance. The tetsubo. Heavy, unforgiving. Each swing demanded full control. 100, then 200, then more. The shoulders burned, but over time, they stopped quitting. This was what carried you into the 4th hour, when others couldn't lift their arms anymore. Fourth, total body strength. Stone lifting, carrying, holding, not for appearance, for capacity, to move, to fight, to endure, under load. Piece by piece, the body became something else, not just trained, forged. One student, Daiki, began to notice it during sparring. Before, he would think during movement. Now, he simply responded, because his body could keep up. Fatigue still came, but it didn't break him. It passed through him, like a storm that no longer destroyed, only tested. Ryuzen watched him one afternoon. "You feel it now," he said. Daiki nodded. "I don't panic when I'm tired anymore." "Good," Ryuzen replied, "because real battles don't begin when you're fresh." He stepped closer. They begin when everything in you wants to stop, and you don't. That was the difference. Before, they trained to perform. Now they trained to persist, to remain functional. When everything started to collapse, the forge was not about building strength. It was about removing weakness, breaking it, rebuilding it, again and again, until there was nothing left that could fail easily. And slowly, something else emerged. Not just stronger bodies, but quieter minds. Because when your body no longer betrays you, you stop doubting yourself. And when doubt disappears, what remains is dangerous. Because now, you don't just know what to do. You can actually do it, for as long as it takes. Chapter 7. The Final Test. 1 year later, the battlefield returned. This time, Daiki stood where Kaito once had. Same armor, same sword, same silence before the storm. But everything else was different. He didn't feel the restless energy Kaito once carried. No overconfidence, no hidden doubt, only stillness. Not because the fear was gone, but because his body no longer amplified it. The horn sounded, and the battle began. Hour 1. The opening clash felt familiar. Movements sharp, reactions fast, technique clean. Daiki engaged his first opponent. 3 exchanges. Victory. No wasted energy. No tension. Just execution. Hour 2. The rhythm shifted as it always did. Breathing deepened. Movement slowed. Mistakes began to appear across the field. Daiki noticed something immediately. He wasn't tired yet. His grip held steady. His shoulders moved freely. His strike still carried weight. Around him, others began to falter. Not from lack of skill, but from the same thing that had taken Kaito, fatigue. An opponent rushed him. Skilled, aggressive, they fought for minutes. The man's technique was refined but rushed. His breathing uneven, his movements tight. Daiki didn't overpower him. He simply endured longer, and eventually, the man's guard dropped. Victory. Hour 3. This was where the battlefield revealed its truth. Bodies everywhere. Warriors who had trained for years. Undone by exhaustion. Daiki felt it now. The weight in his arms. The burn in his legs. The slow pull of fatigue trying to drag him down. But it didn't break him. Because he had been here before. In training. Again and again. He kept moving. Not perfectly, but effectively. Another opponent. Older. Experienced. Their clash was slower. Heavier. More deliberate. Each strike carried meaning. Each mistake, consequence. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. The man's technique was superior. But his body wasn't. Daiki felt the shift. A slight delay in response. A weaker grip. A moment of hesitation. That was all it took. He stepped in. Controlled. Precise. The man's sword slipped from his hand. Silence. Daiki didn't strike. He stepped back. The battle moved on. Hour 4. Most were gone. Dead, wounded, or simply unable to continue. Daiki stood tired, aching, every part of his body screaming, but still functioning, still capable. And in that moment, he understood. This wasn't about winning. It was about not collapsing. Across the battlefield, he saw Ryuzen, the old warrior, still moving, still standing. Their eyes met. A quiet recognition, not of skill, but of endurance. The battle ended. Daiki survived. Not untouched, but unbroken. That night, sitting among the survivors, he looked at his hands, calloused, strong, steady, and he finally understood the truth that had cost Kaito his life. It's not the warrior who starts strongest, who wins. It's the one who is still standing, when strength is no longer enough. Chapter 8. The Final Lesson. Look back at Kaito, a warrior with perfect technique, a disciplined mind, years of training, and yet he still lost. Not because he didn't know what to do, but because he couldn't continue long enough to do it. Now look at Daiki. His technique wasn't perfect. His movements weren't flawless. But when the moment came, when everything started to break, he didn't. That is the difference. And that difference exists in your life right now. Because this was never just about battle. This is about you. You start things with intensity. You plan. You learn. You improve. You build momentum. But then something happens. You get tired. You lose focus. You slow down. Not because you lack ambition, but because your system can't sustain the pressure. And slowly, you stop. That's where most people lose. Not at the beginning, not even in the middle, but at the point where effort becomes uncomfortable and endurance becomes the only thing that matters. So here's the truth. Skill will get you started. Motivation will push you forward, but only endurance, physical, mental, and emotional, will carry you to the end. And endurance is not something you're born with. It's something you build, not in big moments, but in small daily choices. When you keep going, even when it's uncomfortable. When you push a little further, instead of stopping early. When you train your body and mind to stay, instead of escape. That is your version of the forge. So start small. Tomorrow, do just a little more than today. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just enough to stretch your limit. Add 10 more repetitions. Work 10 more minutes. Hold your focus just a little longer. That's how it begins. Not by becoming stronger overnight, but by becoming harder to break. Because in the end, everything comes down to one question. When things get difficult, will you still be standing? If your answer is yes, then prove it. Start now. And if you're ready to stop quitting in the middle, comment yes below. Because the path is simple. Not easy, but simple. Forge your body. Train your mind. Strengthen your spirit. And remember, the one who wins is not the one who starts strongest. It's the one who never stops.